So you want to be a spy, do you? Well, here are some tips on how to become one. Hi, this is Phil Gurski, President and CEO of Borealis Threat and Risk Consulting in Russell, Ontario, Canada, and you're listening to Quick Hits. Yes, this is me. I know I look a little bit different today. I didn't have a fedora in my cabinet. This is the best I could do. It's kind of like a Tilly hat. I do have the shades on. And what I'm trying to convey to you today is I am trying to look like a spy, or as the public media in Hollywood would portray a spy. In actual fact, I didn't wear this at work on a regular basis, although I did, in all honesty, wear a hockey jersey to work on a regular basis. I was not a suit and tie kind of guy. In fact, quite the opposite. And I was known for the fact that I would wear hockey jerseys more often than not to work at CSIS, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. This podcast is being provided for subscribers only. It's a feature I'm going to give to you starting now, a few times a month going forward, to thank you for being subscribers to Borealis. It's a bit of an added bonus to all the other material you're going to receive. Over the course of the last few years, I get a lot of emails, a lot of texts from individuals in Canada, largely, who are interested in a career in intelligence. Now, of course, the reason why they're reaching out to me is that I did spend 32 years in intelligence in Canada, so I've got a bit of a track record in that regard. And these people write to me and they say, how can I get to do what you used to do? Ergo, the purpose of today's podcast is to give you some hints on what you can do to join the Canadian intelligence community. Huge caveat to what I'm going to tell you guys today. I left the security service in April of 2015. Shortly worked for the Ontario Provincial Police's anti-terrorism section, which was also a bit of an intel job. But my current knowledge is at least 5 years out of date. So there's lots of stuff I think is still valid when it comes to working in intelligence, but I would highly recommend to anyone who wants to get a job in security intelligence in Canada that you go to the various websites of the organizations that I'm going to talk about, and they all have websites, to get the most current information, the most accurate information on what you need to do to put your application in. Let's get the most important question out first. Why in the world would you want to work as a spy in the intelligence world? And the answer is very, very simple. It's got to be the coolest job on the planet. No, it's not quite like the James Bond movies or the Bourne movies. And thankfully, it's not like the Johnny English movies or the Austin Power movies for that matter. But as I tell a lot of people who ask me about my career in security intelligence, I had a job where, no exaggeration implied, had a job where I couldn't wait to get to work every day. I had some incredible tasks that I worked on. I was exposed to some incredibly neat information. And even though Canada doesn't have the intelligence culture that's as mature as some of our allies in the United States or United Kingdom, for example, I knew that I was making a difference, however small, in Canada's foreign policy and in Canadian national security. I was also very fortunate, given that I was able to work in a dozen languages or so, that over the first part of my career at Communications Security Establishment, or CSE, I worked in a variety of different targets, and that every day was a new day. Every day was different. When I got to work in the morning, I had no idea what I was going to work on that day. Now, it isn't always the case, but it certainly was the case for me. When I switched to the Canadian Security Intelligence Service in January of 2001, it was a slightly different way of looking at things, albeit I had worked with the service pretty well since its creation in 1984. I'd only joined CSE in 83, so I was still very, very much a junior when it came to the intelligence world. So I knew a lot about CSIS, but my 15 years at CSIS were also great, great years where I worked with some fantastic people on some fantastic tasks and got some fantastic opportunities. Bottom line, I had a great career, and I'm very grateful for it. So you want to become a spy. You want to join this world as well. Well, here are some tips. First and foremost, if you're going to do so in Canada, you have to be a Canadian citizen. That should go without saying, but I just thought I'd mention it. And if the current rules are, as I understand them, you need to have been a Canadian citizen for at least the last 10 years. Secondly, you're going to go through a very invasive security clearance process. Most of the positions that work in intelligence in Canada are classified at top secret, if not higher. That means you'll go through a background check. When I was hired, way back in the 1980s, yes, Ronald Reagan was president, the security background check was 20 years. I believe now it's 10. But don't quote me on that. Again, go to the websites. You'll be asked a lot of questions. You'll be asked to provide references, and they'll be asked a lot of questions, as will people you did not put down as references. What the internal security services of these organizations are trying to do is determine, are you worth the risk? Or is there something in your past that may pose a problem for you to hold a top secret security clearance? You may also be asked to undergo a polygraph. I didn't when I worked at CSE. I did when I worked at CSIS. I'm not sure exactly which organizations require that right now. It's not the funnest time. I've been through it 4 or 5 times. It's just something you have to do. And that's preceded by a very long oral interview, followed by the actual polygraph where you're wired up and you can't move. It's not fun, but it's just part of the job. The most important thing when it comes to a desire to work in security intelligence in Canada, at least as far as I'm concerned, is you have to have a passion for Canada and you have to have a passion for Canadian interests. You have to want to make a difference. Doesn't mean you have to agree with everything the government of the day does. Certainly, I worked for the first Trudeau. I worked for Mulroney. I worked for Turner. I worked through Chrétien. I worked for Harper. And I worked at the very end for not quite Justin Trudeau. I'd retired by then. Saw a lot of prime ministers come and go, Kim Campbell as well. A lot of different policies, a lot of different parties, a lot of different platforms. They didn't always sort of tickle my fancy, but your bottom line is to basically provide intelligence to advise the government of the day, irrespective of party, irrespective of platform. Another thing I would advise, if you want to work in intelligence, figure out what that means for you. Intelligence is a big world. A lot of different careers in there. For example, if you work for CSIS, the security service, you can be an intelligence officer or an investigator. You can be what I was, an analyst. And there are strategic and tactical analysts, and there are operational analysts. You can be a communications analyst, which means people that listen to intercepted communications under warrant and figure out what they're saying, usually in a foreign language. You can be a surveillant. This is somebody who follows people around. Or a whole host of other jobs within the security service. The RCMP, I didn't work for them. I'm not quite as up on them, but they have similar divisions. And also for the RCMP, you have to decide if you want to become a regular member, i.e. a law enforcement officer, or what they call a civilian, a person who isn't a law enforcement officer, but still works for the RCMP. I'm going to hold back on talking about CSE to a certain extent because the CSE that I worked for between 1983 and 2001 is not the CSE of today. You've all probably heard of the Cyber Center, the Cyber Command that CSE houses for all of Canadian government. That's a big part of their mandate that simply didn't exist when I worked at CSE. I'm pretty certain they have a large foreign intelligence mandate still. So the kinds of stuff that I used to do, looking at material that was collected in foreign languages, translating it, and distilling it down to the intelligence that the government of Canada needed. I'm not sure what percentage of what CSE does is still that, but I imagine it's still there. The other thing you have to bear in mind when you work in the Canadian intelligence community is you're going to come across all kinds of personalities. Lots of A-type personalities, lots of other types of people. It's a real dog's breakfast of individuals who are chosen for their talents, for their passions, for their experiences, all basically serving the same goal, which is to help keep Canada safe. It's not a perfect journey. I got bad news for you. If you've ever been in a job where you've worked for an asshole. Well, there are assholes in the Canadian intelligence community as well. Luckily, in my career, I didn't work for too many of those. I had some great bosses, I had some great colleagues, and I don't regret what I did for a nanosecond over those 32 years. My advice to you and my offer to you as my subscribers is, if you are really serious about thinking about a career in Canadian intelligence, drop me a line. I have advised and counseled and spoken to dozens and dozens and dozens of Canadians over the past 5 years or so since my retirement on strategies going forward, what you can and cannot do, what you should and shouldn't do. And I'm more than happy to talk to anybody who thinks that intelligence is for them. It's a great career. It's a vocation as far as I'm concerned. The organizations, the main ones, again, are CSIS, CSE, and the RCMP. There are other ones. The Canada Revenue Agency has an intelligence function. The FinTrack, Financial Transactions, has an intelligence function. National Defence has an intelligence function. Canada Border Services works in intelligence, as do other Transport Canada and a few other agencies here and there. So the big three have the lion's share of the resources, but they're not the only departments in Canada that do security intelligence. Again, I highly recommend that you consider working in intelligence in Canada. It's a great career. It's a great contributor to helping to keep all of us safe here in Canada, and I don't think you're going to regret it. Best of luck to you, and if you want to reach out to me, you know where to find me. However, since this is the end of this podcast, I'm going to leave you with yet another Hardy Boys bit of wisdom from the Hardy Boys Guide to Life. Sorry, took off my sunglasses, now you know who I am. This is from the Secret Agent on Flight 101. So, when being held prisoner in a room on an upper floor, you can use a table lamp to flash an SOS in Morse code out the window. I'm not sure how many of you are old enough to remember what Morse code is. I don't know I know what it is. I sure as hell can't use it. But if you're being held by terrorists in an upper floor, you can flash Morse code out the window. More sage advice from the Hardy Boys. One last thing before I leave you today. If you do choose a career in intelligence, there is one thing that you'll have to figure out how to do, and that's how to tell your family what you're doing. In the old days, you weren't supposed to say anything that was patently ridiculous because there's all kinds of questions asked, and you really should be in a position to answer them. When I worked at CSE, they used to say, well, don't say CSE. In fact, CSE did not exist officially on paper in Canada until 3 months after I joined it in July of 1983. We were told to call it D&D, National Defence, which is fine. D&D is a huge ministry, 80,000 some employees in Canada. The problem is you get yourself in trouble when someone asks you, where do you work? And you say D&D, and they say, whoa, so do I. Where do you work? You can't say the Tilly building, which is the old building, which I think has been condemned, I think, in South Ottawa, because everyone knew what the Tilly building was. It was that super secret spy organization. So you said, well, I worked at Colonel By Drive. Colonel By Drive is where the two towers are, the two D&D towers in downtown Ottawa, right by Parliament, along the Rideau Canal. Until your interlocutor says, oh, I work in the South Tower on the 16th floor. Where do you work? You see how this gets awkward? So if you do want to work in intelligence, figure out a cover story. If you can't figure one out, ask your employers for some help. Anyhow, hope this was helpful. Again, if you have more questions, certainly reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you guys. You know how to reach me on email, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and on Facebook. I'll talk to you again soon. Until then, stay safe.